Hey everybody, Anna Sabramwoods here. I hope you're having a fabulous Friday wherever you are in the world today. If you're watching this from some location, why don't you just tell me in the comments where are you watching it from? That would be super cool. Okay, so welcome. Today I'm going to actually be talking about how to craft specific scenario questions, and I wanted to go over some specific models that I like to use when I design scenarios. If you haven't been here before, my name is Anna Sabramwoods, and I help people craft fabulous scenarios. And we don't just do this because we are into scenarios. We are doing this because scenarios are something that you can use in multiple ways to achieve multiple outcomes. And it's a fabulous tool to have in your back pocket as a learning experience designer, because when you've got that down, there is just it's an awesome resource, and it has so many awesome applications that especially even if you're designing e-learning or face-to-face stuff, it's a fabulous resource. So without further ado, hey Joe, thanks so much for posting that question. I'm going to actually get into that. That's awesome. Okay, so, and you notice these are two different earrings, but it's a set, by the way. All right. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is that structure. Okay, so let's see, this up here is your scenario question. And with this one, you only have one option. With this one, you have two options. And with this one, you have three options. And the options are ways to address the situation. So first, let me talk about this one. This one's one of my favorites, and I think it's actually super underused when it comes to scenario design. So your scenario is a situation it's a contextual, hopefully real life situation that somebody in that your target audience, your learner, is looking at, and they can imagine themselves potentially being in that situation in the future, right? And you've said, okay, here's the situation. How are you going to address it? Now with this one, what's really cool is that sometimes when you're designing your learning, the idea in your entire module is, or your scenario story, is that the learner feels like they're driving it. Their actions, their decisions drive it. But really, it's your story to tell, right? So you control the storyline, but you let the learner feel like they're in charge of it. So with this one, what happens is you give the person the feeling that they're driving the story forward without actually giving them a choice. Let me give you an example. So let's say you have training, you're onboarding people on how to do customer service at a store. And the thing is that there are some behaviors that you want to reinforce, but you don't necessarily need to give people options on how to handle them. So let's say this scenario here is, customer walks in and is looking around waiting for somebody to join them and help them out, but they don't really look like they're interested. The option right here is, and you're folding shirts, what do you do? The option right here is to go help the customer. I could give them another option, say, continue folding shirts, but I don't want to give them that option. One, because I don't want them to continue thinking that that's actually an option. There's only one way to approach this situation, which is go help the customer. So what happens is, I, as a learner, and I've used this and it works beautifully, everybody. It's when you want to give people the opportunity to drive the story forward, but you don't want to give them alternatives. And maybe there's no need to give them alternatives because there really isn't any. But also what you want to do is, in that case, I wanted to draw, let's say, to attention a certain kind of detail or behavior that they would naturally do anyways. So here I'm just reinforcing that behavior and saying, I'm going to go help the customer. And I press that, and I feel like I've moved the story along. But really the only choice to me was this one. It's not really a scenario hack, but I thought I'd bring it up here because I find it really useful and underused, because it can create a lot of engagement and interest and give the learner the feeling of autonomy without really creating some sort of extra branches, right? They just move on to the next spot. Okay, now there's this one. This is a question. This question here, this scenario. This one has two options. I call this one alternate choice. Now, what happens with an alternate choice scenario is that it's different than true and false, always. An alternate choice option is when both of them are equally compelling. An example of this that's really awesome is Lifesaver. It's called like lifesaver.org.uk. Basically, that scenario. And if you can get it on the iPad or if you can get it in your VR headset, check it out. It is amazing. It is amazing. But what they do is they give you two options. And what's fantastic is when I would use this in a situation where you have something where, let's say somebody is in a time crunch and they need to make decisions very quickly. I would give them an alternate choice option, because if you give them more to read while the clock is, let's say, ticking, that puts an undue stress on it. And also, it puts emphasis on reading it instead of actually making a decision. Because if you actually go through Lifesaver, what happens in it is Lifesaver teaches you how to, let's say, give somebody the Heimlich maneuver or give first aid kind of responder stuff, right? But really the overarching theme is that what you're supposed to be doing in there is building up your confidence to actually take action. And the whole thing is not necessarily built to teach you how to do CPR, because you are just like using an iPad and moving it up and down to press on somebody's chest. It's not going to teach them anything, right? I mean, really, other than pace. But all that thing is doing is reinforcing action. So when some of the choices that you're presented with, they're not about necessarily right or wrong. They're about take action or don't take action. And so that's when this one is really effective and really good. So, and do check it out. Now this one, typical multiple choice, right? And if you look at something like Broken Coworker, if you look at something like Haji Kamal, those are where you get these options. Now, one of the things that I want to stress here is going between these two. Sometimes you'll talk to a subject matter expert and you simply cannot come up with another behavior that is, let's say in this particular situation, people usually make one of two decisions. One's good, one's not so good. And if they can't think of another option, then just go with alternate choice. Because the worst thing you can do is add a bogus option that means nothing. Because what it does is it wastes that opportunity. Now you're making them think about something that's really not real. Do you know what I mean? So respect your learner and say, okay, in this situation, there's only two viable options. I'm going to stick with this one. And then the next question, you can go to three if there's, two maybe great options and one's not so good. So you can flip and flop and slip and slide between all three of these in a single, scenario module to your liking, depending on the situation. But the one thing that I always want to reinforce is none of these are throwaway options. They are always tied to a common mistake that somebody makes or a common misconception that somebody has. You want to build that in here. And the other thing I super want to stress is with a scenario, this option, once I click this, I'm not taken to any darn feedback. Nobody's taking me out of the story. You show me what happens when I make this decision. So you have to show, not tell, show the consequence, show what happens, show me what happens. And then once I get to think about it, experience it, burn my hand on iron, then you can say, next time you should unplug the iron and maybe hover your hand over it to see if it's actually not hot anymore. So you can always give the corrective feedback, but do not rob the learner of the awesome experience of consequence after the option is selected. Okay? All right. Now, when we're getting to writing these options, people struggle with this, and I get this a lot. They're like, hey, I talked to the subject matter expert, I interviewed them, and I got great options. But the third one, I know there's a third one, but I can't come up with it. That's good. You're not the expert. Totally fine. Guess what? Don't worry about it. What I want you to do is stop stressing out about writing these perfectly the first time, because that's what we call shitty first drafts. You got to start being okay with that. So what I do is, this is my strategy. You may not adopt it. That's totally fine. But But one of the things that I suggest is, let's say you get the gist of that story. Like you're getting the gist of the first, you know, the first two. You're like, okay, that scenario, and based on your idea of what this question is, how somebody could mess up, just draft something ridiculous here. Do it. What it'll do is it'll prompt your SME to actually read that and be like, whoa, this person obviously needs me. So I better read all of these really carefully and make sure that they are valid, which is actually really good. And what I used to do, and this actually didn't work out as well. What I used to do is I used to, like, after the interview, if I only had like the two options available, I'd send like the storyboard to the SME, and here I would put, please write another alternate bad option here. The flopped terribly because, guys, gals, scenario is, the scenario domain is our domain, right? This is what we do. We write questions. We are in this world of learning. The expert, they don't do this stuff. So when you give them write alternate option here, they have no clue. They send back terrible stuff. So it's better for you to write something for them to critique that's halfway decent, and then they can actually give you feedback on that. If you just give them an empty form saying alternate choice, wrong choice, good choice, no, sucks. It sucks. So yeah, so I wrote a little motivational message for you about that. Don't overthink this. Get feedback on shitty first draft ASAP. The less time you invest in that draft and get it out to that person, the faster it'll come back to you with some good feedback, and you won't stress out over it or get, if you start investing time into things that you're not very sure about, then you start getting more possessive about them. And then you are getting more sensitive about getting feedback on that because you invested all this time. So to avoid that, because it's going to be inevitable, get it out to them as fast as possible and say, you know what, whatever they say, it's fine because I made that last one up based on my best guess. So that's what I suggest. All right. Okay. So scenarios versus simulation. How would you explain the difference between them to clients? So a simulation is, to me, a simulation is when you are, and thanks for posting a question, Joe. Calvin, thanks for posting your questions about Red Bulls. I actually don't drink any Red Bulls. I actually got off coffee. Maybe that's why I'm so peppy. Just so you know. But to me, a simulation is when you're actually in an environment that simulates the actual space you're going to be in, which is almost like a first-person experience, right? You get to be the hands, you get to use the tools. And in a scenario, it's actually what you want in a scenario is the distance of being the observer, because it's actually easier for you to observe somebody else and notice their mistakes and notice their patterns. And it's kind of funny, but for some reason, when there's that distance, you can actually experience the journey and the success of a person, I think, much more easier because you're actually observing them versus you being in a simulation. Because in a simulation, it's not real, I guess. And there's a different purpose behind it. So if you're trying to relay some kind of a lesson or having somebody experience the satisfaction of success through somebody else's journey, or have them have aha moments, the scenario is better for that distance and that observation. A simulation is good for actually practicing your skill and executing on it. So I hope that makes it clear. Yeah, so that was it. Thanks so much for your questions and your comments. Do you have any other questions about scenarios? Glad that was helpful, Joe. Yeah, so I'm going to be here again on Monday. Guess what I'm going to be talking about? Scenarios. Now, if you are designing scenarios and you're serious about getting awesome at it, and you're serious about getting focus and some serious feedback, I am running a workshop cohort which runs for 6 weeks, and basically get together with other learning experience designers and scenario designers, and we just week by week We basically build from soup to nuts. We build out your scenario. So if that's something that you're interested in, I will put a link underneath. You basically do need to have a call with me because I need to make sure that you're a good fit, because we are looking for people who are ready to go with a project, and so that we can actually work together to give each other feedback. And it's really hands-on. It's not something where we just explore theories and talk about reasons why we should use something. So if that's interesting to you and you want to join us, I would love to talk to you. I'll put the link underneath the video. Also, if you sleep on this and you think 3 a.m., whew, I wish Anna answered this question, come back here, put that question in the comments, and then I will answer it next week. I do one of these almost every single day, Monday to Friday. So I'm probably bound to answer your question sometime. All right. So have a wonderful rest of the evening, day, wherever you are. And also have a wonderful weekend. And I'll talk to you next time, friends. Bye. Thanks for stopping by.